Hi, I'm Scot LaMar, host of The Spark. Today on The Spark, we're going to be talking about probably the most famous boundary in the United States, the Mason-Dixon Line, the history of the Mason-Dixon Line. Where I'm standing right now, Pennsylvania on my left foot, Maryland on my right. This side, there's a P, it's kind of hard to see for Pennsylvania. On the back, there's an M for Maryland. We'll talk with a historian who knows all about the history of the Mason-Dixon Line. Michael Dixon, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
The Mason-Dixon Line is probably the most famous boundary line in the United States. Why?
I think so. So for a couple of reasons. If we go historically back, right now we're just barely standing in Pennsylvania. We're just in Pennsylvania. Maryland's right there at our edge. And you know, if you go back to the top of the 1700s, Scott, who knew whether this was in Maryland or Pennsylvania? And there was an enormous battle between the royal proprietor of these two colonies, Maryland and Pennsylvania, and there was a lot at stake. You see, Philadelphia, the Maryland proprietors claimed that Philadelphia was part of the territory. The Penns were claiming that much of this land several miles south of here were. So we had to sort that out, would be one thing. And then, once that's done, in 1767, Mason and Dixon received their commission for the work. They go back home to England, and probably everybody thought it was all over with, albeit very important. And then along comes the Civil War. And if you stop and talk to people today, most people, and you ask them, what does that old stone and that old line that stretches up and down through the Chester County countryside mean? Most of them would tell you that the South begins here. This line had to feel very appealing because freedom was right over there. So people, freedom seekers, begin to self-emancipate themselves. They're not waiting for anybody else. And so it becomes a very active conduit on the Underground Railroad.
So let's go back to before Mason and Dixon, and before they were commissioned to find the Maryland-Pennsylvania border. I mean, Pennsylvania and Maryland almost came to blows, right?
Oh yes, there was bloodshed, and you consider we're competing over territory that has a lot of money. I mean, there's an enormous stake in this thing, and so, for instance, there's a Marylander who's with the Maryland militia, Colonel Cressup. He heads up toward Wrightsville, Pennsylvania, and the Calvert family says, "Oh, you know, all that line from like about where Route 30 goes down through the Susquehanna is yours. Go ahead and parcel it off to Marylanders." Well, that didn't sit well. The sheriff from Lancaster shows up. Now, Cressup was a little fiery kind of person, chases off the sheriff, does that 2 or 3 times. He then shows up with the militia. They end up arresting him after a little firefight. And one of the militia officers said to him, "Well, Mr. Colonel Cressup, what do you think about Philadelphia now?" He says, "Well, it's the finest city in Maryland." So there was, and there's a fair amount of that goes on, with a little bit of blood being spilled on the line.
What about on the other side? I mean, were there Pennsylvanians who claimed parts of Maryland?
Yes, so both sides can play that game, and there's a very historic section here on the Chester County line called the Nottingham Lots. The Penns come down well into Maryland, today's standard of Maryland, and they parcel off these lots, 500 acres, Scott. So if you were willing to come down from Westchester, Philadelphia, Lancaster perhaps, they would give you 500 acres of land down there to settle in what was Maryland. Well, you can imagine how that went. So yeah, there was a lot of give and take with that type of thing.
How long did that go on?
So the Mason and Dixon start the line in 1763. There are occurrences of that through the 1750s and into the 1760s when the King of England says, "Look, I've had enough of this. Let's get this line settled. I got trouble up in Boston. You know, there's a lot of agitators up there." So through the 1750s and 1760s, and actually probably even before.
So Mason and Dixon, their commission, what did their commission say? What were they supposed to do?
So they were to draw a line that split the Delmarva Peninsula in half. If we were standing somewhere between what is present-day Maryland and Delaware, and we saw that stone right there, it wouldn't say D on the other side, it would say P for Pennsylvania, because that was part of Pennsylvania. So they had a couple of tasks to sort out. One was to get a line that ran up and down the Delmarva Peninsula and basically just split it in half. And then, we're at milepost number 1 right there. So we're 1 mile on the westward track of several hundred miles, couple hundred miles over toward western Pennsylvania. So it goes from here. Think of these guys doing this. We see this little forest here today. You know, they've got chaining. They literally are just doing there's no looking at scopes and GPS. They're looking at the stars at night and have all sorts of supporting crews, have to clear forest and woodland. And so from this northeastern corner of Maryland, and so the Delaware line, maybe a mile in that direction, they begin a over 200-mile trek through Chester County, the borders of present-day Chester, Lancaster, York, Franklin, Cumberland, and on out the line, Fulton. And eventually they'll get so far west that they decide maybe we better stop. They were heading into Indian territory, and so their commission stuff, their work.
That was my next question about, because the frontier, the Susquehanna River was pretty much the frontier west of the Susquehanna River. And I also was thinking about the French and Indian War was, being completed at that time as well. I mean, this was not an easy, not only the equipment that you mentioned, but there seemed to be some danger involved too.
Oh, definitely. Of course, this was an enormous logistics crew: food, cooks, wagon drivers, people to pack up their careful instruments because these things had to be accurate. Native American scouts, and as they got out past Adams County, those Native American scouts are saying, "Hey, look, we're starting to pass warpath trails and stuff like that," and you can even see it on the map that they drew. And finally, their Native American escorts said, "Enough of this, and you go on if you want to, but we're not in on this." So that was the end of the line.
So, I mean, for that time period, that seems to be quite a scientific accomplishment.
It was. So periodically, the Coastal Survey, the Pennsylvania, Maryland Geological, Delaware Geological Surveys have returned to validate the work of this thing. And they are amazed at how accurate this was. A few minor errors, but there was no substantial deviation.
These stones, you have to search for them in a lot of cases. Why weren't they taken care of? I mean, this one is right on the edge of a forest. Why weren't they taken care of, and how many still exist?
Yeah, so mostly, I think as Mason-Dixon had no idea what the meaning of their work was going to be. I mean, they had a nice commission. They were royal scientists, scholars of the time. And I'm sure they thought, well, what a wonderful job. We've done a neighborhood dispute, except with a lot of territory. Most people would have thought this was going to fade into memory and be nothing more than the Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland border and things like that. And then comes that Civil War we were talking about. And then after the Civil War, freedom was over there, enslavement was over there. Come regulations. See, we've got to deal with Reconstruction. We've got to deal with the laws that come out of that era. At this line, people begin facing things like the Colored Car Act, that just like in Louisiana, said African Americans have to go to the back of the train. Maryland will pass those laws. Literally, when they came 1 mile, we're 1 mile in here, the conductor would have met them on the train and sent them back. So all of these things are reinforcing that. But in terms of your question about how they got lost, I think most people didn't pay too much attention to it. It's what we do often with our historical relics and treasures. We don't perceive the importance of them at the time. So they've been lost in woodlands. They've been lost to constructions of roads. I can point to you some that are under roadways. Farmers doing the harvest every year probably got tired of those old stones being in the way. And they were quarried in England. You know, this was something these were very special stones. So many have been lost. Just an enormous number have been lost. And yet, if you travel through eastern, central, western Pennsylvania, you'll find them in special places. They've been well preserved, and there's nice historical markers as you get up to state line Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Baltimore County, out toward Frederick and Hagerstown, and so a few have survived.
Michael Dixon, this has been fascinating. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks.
For more from Mosaic, please like and subscribe to the channel or check out another video. To help support this project, please visit witf.org/mosaic.